Whether you can list the Ten Commandments in order or not, you all know that the third commandment is, "Thou shalt not take the name of the Lord thy God in vain. For the Lord will not hold him guiltless that taketh his name in vain." And you all know what it means to take the Lord's name in vain. That has to do with keeping your language pure, doesn't it? With not using the name of the Lord as an expletive. Now, expletives are part of our lives. They're part of our vocabulary. Some expletives are cleaner than others, but we all use them. I don't know anyone, no matter how pious, who doesn't use some kind of exclamation to express shock or grief or dismay or anger. And this is not an anti-expletive sermon. I mean, when you stub your toe or smash your thumb or suddenly remember that you forgot an important appointment, it's almost inevitable that something is going to come out of your mouth, even if it is as innocuous as ouch or holy cow. Or when you find yourself trying to make a point, particularly when you're angry or put out or at wit's end, and it is second nature to most of us to add intensifiers to our sentences. So that rather than simply saying, "shut the door," when someone's standing at the threshold letting an Arctic blast come into the house, you might say, "shut the ever-living door," or the like. Now, if my speech were free of exclamations and intensifiers, I might be inclined to stand up here today and preach a holiness sermon. Try to shame you into ridding your speech of all extraneous grolixes, which, by the way, is the official term for the usage of punctuation marks, such as the ampersand, aspirand, the asterisk, and pound sign, etc., in comic strips to represent profanity and vulgarity. The official term for those is grolixes, though some have suggested calling them obscenicons. The thing is, I use exclamations, I use intensifiers, we all do, to some degree or another. I would encourage you to keep your grolixes just as clean as you can. After all, Jesus says in Matthew 15, 17 through 18, "Don't you see that whatever enters the mouth goes into the stomach and then out of the body? But the things that come out of the mouth come from the heart, and these make a man unclean." And I think there's little more that I can add to that. The words that come from your mouth are a reflection of what's in your heart. And once you've said something, you can't unsay it. And like I said, we all use exclamations, we all use intensifiers. They're part of our natural flow of speech. I'm not going to stand here today and try to browbeat you into changing the whole way you speak. I would encourage you, however, to choose your exclamations and intensifiers carefully. I don't know if you've noticed this or not, but almost all of the interjections people use come either from their lowest thoughts or their highest thoughts. On the low end are the crassest words we can think of for excrement, private body parts, and conjugal relations. No need for any explanation there. You all know exactly what I'm talking about. As Curly once said in a Three Stooges episode, when being sworn in to give testimony, he was asked by the bailiff, "Do you swear?" And he replied, "No, but I know all the words." Now, in our society, our tolerance for crude language has changed considerably in my lifetime. On May 27, 1972, George Carlin took the stage at Santa Monica Civic Auditorium in Southern California and changed legal history by directly challenging the 7 words that at that time could not be said on television. Now, what he said on that historic day was not without its merits, because in addition to delivering a well-crafted routine, he pointed out that the legal standards for what constituted vulgarity at that time were capricious, arbitrary, and vague. and that the enforcement of those standards tended to be post hoc indictments of attainder, because the only means of discovering whether a given word or a series of words or sentence officially crossed the line was to say it. And if what you said or the way you said it was offensive to the people with the authority to penalize or punish you for saying it, then you would receive impromptu notification of your offending words in the form of penalty or punishment. But that was 50 years ago, and those kind of standards, frankly, no longer exist. As a matter of fact, our society at its cutting edges doesn't just tolerate vulgarity in our broadcast media, it positively celebrates it. And if you think that that is an exaggeration, when you get home, go to the internet and dial up the song that Megan Thee Stallion and Cardi B performed at the Grammys earlier this year. Give it a listen. Because this song, the lyrics of which are so over the top as to defy lampoonery, expounds upon and exalts as a point of the protagonist's personal pride in her own concupiscence, a tendency toward borderline diluvial hypermucosal excretory superabundance, the after effects of which, according to her report, may require the services of a janitorial crew or at best ServPro, perhaps even a hazmat crew. And while she may have been exaggerating, I'm not. This performer takes great pride in her molluscan qualities, and for her preposterous articulation of this basic bodily function, her fellow musicians awarded her a Grammy. Beloved, the public square at 21st century America is so profuse with vulgarity that it would be a wonder if you had not been exposed to it, and if none of that vulgarity had ever made its way into your vocabulary. To the world, I have nothing to say about this. The words of the mouth flow from the abundance of the heart. As Jesus tells us in Matthew 12:37, "For by the words of thy mouth shalt thou be justified, and by thy words shalt thou be condemned." To the church, however, I give you the words of James from James 3:1-12. "Not many of you should become teachers, my brothers. For you know that we who teach will be judged with greater strictness. For we all stumble in many ways, and if anyone does not stumble in what he says, he is a perfect man, able also to bridle his whole body. If we put bits into the mouths of horses so that they obey us, we guide their whole bodies as well. Look at the ships also. Though they are so large and are driven by strong winds, they're guided by a very small rudder, wherever the will of the pilot directs. So also the tongue is a small member, yet it boasts of great things. How great a forest is set ablaze by such a small fire. And the tongue is a fire, a world of unrighteousness. The tongue is set among our members, staining the whole body, setting on fire the entire course of life, and set on fire by hell. For every kind of beast and bird, of reptile and sea creature can be tamed and has been tamed by mankind, but no human being can tame the tongue. It is a restless evil, full of deadly poison. With it we bless our Lord and Father, and with it we curse people who are made in the likeness of God. From the same mouth come blessing and cursing. My brothers, these things ought not to be so. Does a spring pour forth from the same opening both fresh and salt water? Can a fig tree, my brothers, bear olives, or a grapevine produce figs? Neither can a salt pond yield fresh water. But for the purposes of today's lesson, that's all I want to say about vulgarity. Because the question of the usage of vulgarity is of no small importance in the overall schemata of the pursuit of personal holiness. But it's not the topic that I'm addressing this morning. No, vulgarity is a feature of human language that dominates the expressions of our lowest thoughts, our basest thoughts. And it can be a real problem for some, but it's a very different kind of problem from that of profanity. Because profanity is not the usage of words referring to that which is vulgar. Profanity is the misuse or the abuse of words referring to that which is holy. Now, in regard to the question of profanity, I want to start where most of the sermons you've heard on this topic tend to end. Because we've all heard preachers tell us that the usage of faux swear words is every bit as sinful as the usage of bona fide swear words. This is no less so when it comes to the misuse of approximations of the name of God. Now, this is something of which we ought to be aware. I mean, I don't know if you realize it or not, but the great majority of the things that we say in the way of interjections are derived from the name of God. Now, before I go any further, I want you to know that it's not my intention today to try to make you feel guilty for using some innocuous or harmless exclamation that you've been using all of your life. The information I'm about to give you is given for the purpose of heightening your awareness that God is always at the forefront of our minds, and His name is constantly on our lips. And since time immemorial, people have cried out the name of God at times of great distress, sudden surprise, and joyous celebration. I mean, you've all seen these home makeover shows, and you know how it is that at the end of every episode there's always the reveal and the before and after pictures. And the homeowners always react in very much the same way. The first thing they do is cover their mouths. They stop their mouths so that nothing untoward will come out of them, and then as they go from room to room, they all seem to let the same thing fly from their mouths without a second thought. They all seem to say, "Oh my God." That always makes me cringe a little. Because that usage of the word God usually strikes me as a vain usage. That is an empty usage. Now, it could be that in some cases the homeowner is actually being prayerful or worshipful, that their exclamation, "Oh my God," is actually intended for God's ears, and that as they cry out His name, their intent is that He will receive this as thanksgiving or as worship of some kind. But in most cases, I don't think that that's so. I don't get that sense. What I hear is the name of God being sputtered into the air, not for intentional disrespect, but for no purpose other than to express an emotion. Basically, for a vain purpose, an empty purpose. But that isn't the most troublesome way that people misuse the name of God. It's much more troublesome to me when I hear the name of God being used as an expletive in and of itself. When someone smashes their thumb, or misses a traffic light, or is fighting with their computer, and you hear flying from their mouths the word God, that word doesn't usually come alone. It's usually accompanied by an adjective or an adverb expressing either the desire that God would damn the object of that person's wrath, or that person's affirmation that He has damned it already. Now, I don't have to tell you that this is a serious misuse of the name of God, not just because it invokes His name for a vain purpose, simply to express your displeasure, but also because it's presumptuous in the extreme, because God is the one who has the exclusive right to pronounce salvation and damnation. And it's my considered opinion that He's very unlikely to actually damn the person driving in front of you to hell just because he or she waited till the light turned green before putting on their turn signal. Now, most of us, I presume, do not use the name of God quite so lightly. But I wonder if you realize just how many of our seemingly innocuous expressions come to us as corrupted or foreshortened forms of expressions which do make vulgar language of the name of God. For instance, when I was growing up, it was strictly against the rules in our house to use the name of God in such a way so as to pronounce his damnation on someone or something. But it was reasonably acceptable to say, gosh darn it, or dag nabbit, or dad gummit. Say that the consarn mower won't start, or the dad blame mower, doggone, gall dang, gall dern, gosh dang mower won't start. And it's easy to see how we get there from the original expression, where the name of God is clearly in view. Now, for most of us, using the name of God in vain is not our intention when we use such expressions. And I'm not calling your attention to this for the purpose of saying shame on you if you do, because you're subconsciously using God's name in vain. When it comes to things like this, I really do think, insofar as this is a matter between you and God, that the intention of your heart really does make a difference. And that the judgment about whether or not saying dag nabbit is actually some kind of faux blasphemy and therefore offensive to God is truly a matter of conscience. My purpose in calling this to your attention today has more to do with heightening your awareness about the fact that it is human nature to have the name of God constantly on our lips, either as a blessing or as a curse. And this is reflected in our expressions. Because whether we realize it or not, the name of God was clearly in view when most of these expressions were coined, because they came about and remained in use precisely because they gave those who used them the kind of verbal release that they felt they needed to fully express themselves, while at the same time invoking the name of God without actually saying the name of God. Egad is short for O God. Oh my gosh is oh my God. Oh my stars, oh my heavens refer to God by invoking his dwelling place. Begorra is an Irishism for by God. And faith in Begorra is short for by my faith in God. By gosh, by gum, by Jove stands for by Jehovah. Gee whiz is a phononym, what is it? Phomonym, that's it. Phomonym for Jesus, often shortened to G, G's, sheesh, jeebers, and jinkies. Jiminy Cricket is a euphemism for Jesus Christ, along with Jiminy Christmas, Jeepers Creepers, Geez Louise, Jimmy Crack Corn, and Judas Priest. Cripes is a euphemism for Christ, as is crikey. Criminy is a foreshortening of Christ in me. Remember those George Gobel commercials years ago from Skelly Gas? And he would say at the end, criminently, we're trying. Criminently is a foreshortening of Christ Almighty. By cracky is a corruption of by Christ. And bejabbers, bejesus, and by jingo come from by Jesus. Gadzooks is a reference to the crucifixion. It means God's hooks, referring to the nails of the cross. Zoiks, Shaggy's favorite expression from Scooby-Doo, also a shortening of God's hooks. Similarly, zounds is short for God's wounds. Even drat comes to us from the name of God. The original expression was may God rot it. It was shortened to God rot it, then to draught it, then draught, which transformed into drat. Beloved, it's so easy to trivialize the name of God without even meaning to do so. And my caution today is just to be careful in your language. Pay attention to what you say. Consider what those words may mean to you, to others, and to God. But let your conscience be your guide. Now, if you've ever heard any lesson before on taking the Lord's name in vain, you know that that's where most of them leave off. Because historically, at least in my lifetime, that's the extent to which we've concerned ourselves with the Lord's name. is to avoid using it in vulgar ways. Because that's the way we've mostly understood the commandment, thou shalt not take the Lord's name in vain, which wording, of course, comes to us from the King James Version of the Bible. But today I want to draw your attention to some other translations of Exodus 27. In the NIV, this verse reads, you shall not misuse the name of the Lord your God, for the Lord will not hold anyone guiltless who misuses his name. And there are lots of ways to misuse the name of God without using his name as a byword. And some of the various translations of Exodus 27 highlight some of those ways. In the JPS, it reads, you shall not swear falsely by the name of the Lord your God, for the Lord will not clear anyone who swears falsely by his name. And this reflects the concern that Jesus takes up in Matthew 5:33 through 37, where he says, again, you have heard that it was said to people long ago, do not break your oaths, but fulfill your vows to the Lord. But I tell you, do not swear at all, not by heaven, because it is God's throne, and not by earth, because it is his footstool, and not by Jerusalem, because it is the city of the great king. And do not swear by your own head, since you cannot make one hair white or black. Instead, let your yes mean yes, and your no mean no. Anything beyond this is from the evil one. Exodus 27 in Moffat reads, you shall not use the name of the Eternal, your God, profanely, for the Eternal will never acquit anyone who uses his name profanely. Now this means more than simply refraining from using the name of God as a swear word. The word profane doesn't mean dirty. The word profane, as it's used here, simply means worldly. And I think that the way Moffat understands this verse is that God is cautioning us against using his name to bless things that should not be blessed. You remember the song that I made reference to earlier? Well, I've seen music award shows on which artists who are winning awards for songs every bit as vulgar as that step up to the microphone and say, in reference to their accomplishment, I'd like to thank my Lord and Savior, Jesus Christ. Calling on God to bless that which is manifestly unblessable. I have a relative who at one point in her life, 15 or 16 years ago, became pregnant out of wedlock. Now, this was not a chance occurrence. She had been tempting the odds for nearly a decade. It's not that she sleeps around. She's what I would like to refer to as a serial monogamist. She falls in love, and she's serious about whoever she's in love with, but never seems to last very long. Anyway, she was pregnant, despite the fact that she had been using birth control. Well, her mother came to me and said, I've told my daughter that I think we should give this child a biblical name because this is a miracle baby. And I asked her, what do you mean this is a miracle baby? And she said, well, she got pregnant, even though she's on this very effective means of birth control. That could only have happened if God wanted this to happen. And since God is giving her this baby, therefore we think this child is destined to be a great servant of God. And I responded, you're kidding, right? You do remember going on a field trip in 6th grade to see The Visible Woman, don't you? Biological success is not a miracle. It's as natural and as predictable as the sun coming up in the morning. You spin the roulette wheel so many times, it's bound to come up 00 sometime. God didn't give her this baby as some special dispensation. This girl has been running daily trials on her birth control for years, and she finally found the exception that proves the rule. Read the label. Satisfaction is not guaranteed. The fact that Captain America got one past the goalpost is not a miracle from God. It's the result of sheer will and determination on his part to test the limits of this technology. Well, they found the limit. The natural consequence of that is impregnation. Don't you dare make God your co-conspirator in sin by somehow suggesting that this baby is his stamp of approval on that unholy union. Well, she didn't talk to me for a while after that, but I made my point clear. In my estimation, it is a serious misuse of the name of God to call on his name to bless things that should not be blessed. Exodus 27 in the Rotherham Bible reads, "Thou shalt not utter the name of Yahweh thy God for falsehood, for Yahweh will not let him go unpunished who uttereth his name for falsehood." Now this one really gets me. And I don't want to say too much on this right now, because when I get started, I can go for a long time on people who use the name of God for falsehood. You've probably seen this email. It goes around every year. Or you've seen it as a glurge on Facebook or someplace. It tells the story of a college professor who was a professed atheist and who made it his business to try to disabuse all of his students of their faith. And every year he would issue a challenge by holding up a piece of chalk and saying, "If there is a God, then I challenge anyone here who believes in that God to call on your God to prevent this piece of chalk from breaking when I drop it on the floor." And as the story goes, this went on for several years until one year a timid freshman accepted the challenge. He prayed that God would not allow the chalk to break, and as the professor dropped the chalk, his fingers slipped and the chalk bounced off his pant leg and landed safely in the cuff of his pants. Now, it may surprise you to know that that story has been around for no less than 150 years. It can be traced to a version of the story which was printed in the memoirs of Richard Harvey, a minister who lived in the 19th century. But I was there at LCU Encounter when a famous youth minister in our brotherhood told that story as part of his testimony of faith, as though it had happened to him, as though he were the student who challenged the professor. In other words, he lied. Now, he lied for a good reason. He wanted those kids at that gathering to be inspired in their faith. But, beloved, the Bible has a name for that kind of thing. It's called false testimony. It's called bearing false witness. God has already sworn out his testimony in the blood of his Son, Jesus Christ, and our duty as Christians is to show forth the testimony that God has already given. He doesn't need our testimony to supplement his own, and he certainly doesn't benefit when we try to beef up our testimony by embellishing it. God is a big boy, and he can stand alone in the arena of truth and come out the winner. He doesn't need or want you or me or anyone else making up stories to try to cause people to believe in him. Lies don't produce lasting faith. Yet I get emails upon emails with flashing headlines. This is true. This is really, really true. This really happened. And then you read the thing, and it's an obvious glurge. A story so glib, so trite, so hackneyed, it can't possibly be true. Some sappy piece of tripe that's been printed and reprinted in Reader's Digest and Chicken Soup for the Soul and God knows where else ad infinitum. And this is supposed to bolster your faith in God? And then at the bottom it says, if you forward this to 10 people in 10 minutes, God will bless you. Or if it's a meme on the internet, can I get an amen? Well, no. you may not. First, because if you have to ask for an amen, your need for attention is out of balance with the realities of your life. And second, and more importantly, because that is using God's name for falsehood. And God will not let anyone go unpunished who uses his name for falsehood. A few years ago, my inbox was flooded one December with a glurge entitled, "A Christmas Letter from Jesus." I don't know if you've seen this thing, but good grief. Speaking of exclamations. It's nothing but a list of pet peeves about people missing the point of Christmas. It's just some guy's opinion, some person's diatribe about abuses of the Christmas season, some of which seem to be valid, but none of which can be found anywhere on the lips of Christ. But it's written as though it were written by Jesus, as though it were in his voice, the Lord himself in first person, with his signature affixed to the bottom. Beloved, thou shalt not utter the name of the Lord thy God for falsehood. For the Lord will not let anyone go unpunished who utters his name for falsehood. That's why I don't like to sing the song, "Follow Me," number 395 in your songbook. Because the lyrics of that song are Ira Stanpill's personal testimony, not mine. It isn't my story, and Jesus did not say those things to me. I traveled down a lonely road and no one seemed to care. The burden on my weary back had bowed me to despair. I oft complained to Jesus how folks were treating me, and then I heard him say so tenderly, "My feet were also weary upon that Calvary road. The cross became so heavy I fell beneath the load. Be faithful, weary pilgrim, the morning I can see. Just lift your cross and follow close to me." Well, it's a good message, and I'm happy that Ira wrote it down and sang it. But it's not my testimony. Exodus 27 in the Darby translation, "Thou shalt not idly utter the name of Jehovah thy God, for Jehovah will not hold him guiltless that idly uttereth his name." Shotgun version, "You are not to take up the name of Yahweh your God for emptiness, for Yahweh will not clear him that takes up his name for emptiness." The CGTS, "You shall not take up the name of Yahweh Elohim your God for futility. Yahweh shall not hold innocent anyone who takes up his name for futility." The Amplified Bible, "You shall not use or repeat the name of the Lord your God in vain, that is, lightly or frivolously, in false affirmations or profanely. For the Lord will not hold him guiltless who takes up his name in vain." And that brings us to today's text. Matthew 6:9. Jesus said, "After this manner, therefore pray ye, Our Father which art in heaven, hallowed be thy name." Brothers and sisters, the holiness of God's name is a high priority in the kingdom of heaven. It is the third in 10 commandments, preceded only by, "Thou shalt have no other gods before me, and thou shalt not worship any graven image." And it's third in the Lord's Prayer. First, we affirm that God is our Father. Second, we affirm that God is someone who is somewhere. He is not some amorphous whatever somewhere off in the ether. He is our Father, which art in heaven. And third, we affirm that the name of God is to be held holy. It is not to be used as a byword. It's not to be trivialized. It's not to be misused. It's not to be used to bolster our credibility. It's not to be used profanely. It is not to be used for falsehood. It is not for any vain or empty purpose. It is the name of God. And it is to be hallowed. That's my lesson for today.